The ability to ignite change has to come from your ability to motivate others, because you have to bring people along to a journey that sometimes they're not wanting to go along with. Everybody wants to be a part of something that's bigger. A key part of the ability to bring teams together, where you create that culture of openness, where it's not about being negative or bringing somebody's work down. It's about how do we continue to make those improvements that enable us all to be better. If you talk to your friends or coworkers, they see one part of you that you are allowing them to see. And if you have a really successful, healthy relationship with your coach, you can kind of get into the real things that are driving and kind of holding you back. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know everything. And when you can lean into that and rely on your team, who may know more, that becomes really powerful.
Hi, welcome to Wisdom from the Helm, where we go beyond the typical highlight reel of real estate's most trusted women to reveal the secrets of their success, not just in business, but also in life. Welcome, Ginger Wilcox. We're so excited to host you on our Wisdom from the Helm podcast.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
I have to say, when Heather and I were doing all of our research and preparing for this, we just love the variability in your career path. You have truly seen the real estate industry from like every single angle, which is so cool and so unusual. You had your own online brokerage, amazing, early days, which is so cool. You were with Trulia. Then you were doing tech transaction sort of optimization with Home Point, and then you did Home Point mortgage lending. And now you're the CEO of Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate. I mean, what's left, Ginger?
Great question. This may be where I retire. We'll see. I have quite a few years left in my career, I think, but it's been an incredible journey. I really have had the opportunity, and I think it's unique to do it from so many different vantage points. And it's been such a fun experience because each part of my journey has been so different. And I think it's really shaped where I'm at today.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're not going to spend any more time talking about all the things that you've done because everyone already knows. We're going to spend all of our time talking about things that we're obsessed with, which is really learning more about the how of your leadership journey, because people rarely talk about the inner work of successful leadership, and especially women in particular. We can't wait to hear how you think about these things. So are you ready to dive in?
I'm ready to dive in. Sounds great.
Okay. So our first question is focused on this idea of leading from within. Early on in our careers, many of us believe this issue or blocker to our success is outside of us. It's out there somewhere, like the role, the market, it's my manager, it's the client, it's the competitor, it's someone else's team, whatever it is. And then you reach this point as you go through this leadership journey where there's an inflection where the really good to great leap is how we think of it, where a leader realizes the blockers to overcome are actually on the inside. So was there a moment like that for you? And how did that change the way you show up in your work?
It's a great question. And it's something that I've actually reflected on a lot. There wasn't specifically like a moment where you have this aha, you think maybe you have an epiphany and things change. I would say it was more of maybe a transformational phase in my life where I was going through a career change. I was also going through personal changes, actually the end of my marriage, which it makes you look at everything a little bit differently. And when you have that time to sit and reflect on where you're at and, maybe why you're not where you exactly want to be, it creates a path where you're able to think about things differently. And all of those have sort of influenced where I'm at today, I would say, because it set me on a different journey of looking within and understanding what was really important for me as I looked to what I wanted my entire life to look like, because sometimes we try to compartmentalize like our career and our personal life. And when you get to this sort of level of leadership, it's all intertwined, and you have to love what you do every day because it's our life, it's our social life. It influences how we lead at home too. And so I think that it was such an interesting phase of this sort of personal journey that really also helped my professional journey as well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. It sounds like you were saying there that, it was about a matter of like designing your life in a way that integrated these things more than maybe they had been before, and intentionally choosing what it is you wanted to be part of that life rather than letting it happen to you.
Yeah, I think that that's a great way to describe it. It was less about being reactive to what was coming your way as you looked to the experiences that you had, but being proactive about guiding and changing path. I think that for a long time in my career, and I think many people face this, especially if you're an overachiever, we're so driven and everything is about that like sort of next milestone. And at some point you have to kind of find your calm place.
Well, a follow-up question to that, Ginger, is, this idea of being intentional and aligning your life and, choosing a different path, really consciously. We think about this idea of energy and like really identifying what energizes you, intersecting with what you're really good at, right? And so as achievers, you just nailed it. Like Danielle and I can relate to this so bad. Achievers will just like climb. You want me for that role? Sure, I'll do that, without actually checking, do I want that role? Am I really gifted at it? Does it really energize me, right? And we can call that genius, or we call that your superpowers, but super curious for you, in that reflection period, or even just in your career at this point, have you identified like what is your superpower that kind of, you're uniquely gifted at, and you just get a lot of joy, right? You just start like you're in flow and you're feeling energized about.
I like to think that my superpower is my ability to ignite change. And I think where that comes from is kind of two things. One is the ability to ignite change has to come from your ability to motivate others, because you have to bring people along to a journey that sometimes they're not really wanting to go along with. And one of my unique abilities has been to actually be able to see the genius in others. And I've always had sort of interesting teams, sometimes having people on my teams even that other people didn't believe in. But when you can find that spark of genius with others and help them see it and help bring them along to something that's bigger, everybody wants to be a part of something that's bigger. And I think that that's been a real catalyst for my success in my career, is that ability to see that in others. And then with that, be able to break big kind of meaty challenges down into something that's actionable and hold people accountable to that. And from that, I've been able to, like, no problem is too big for me, really. And I think that that's been a gift, because I'm not afraid. My belief in others enables me to really achieve kind of interesting things.
Yeah, it feels like it's inspiring, motivates them, probably.
Yeah.
A motivator is on the note of seeing other people's genius, that's a real gift. It's not something that comes naturally, I think, to many. And not only to see it, but then to take action on it, to sort of place people in those roles is I think it takes a lot of courage for leaders to do that, because sometimes it doesn't feel obvious. It's like other people from the outside in are looking at like, wait, what? So I'm curious if there's any story or example, and you can keep it anonymous, that's fine. But just of like, have you ever had that surprise, or someone felt surprised, like, oh, you see that in me, right? Or, just tell us more about that.
I won't name the company, but I had a team in one of the companies where I was leading, and we used to joke that it was a land of misfit toys. And it was this group of people that you wouldn't have necessarily thought would come together. And in some cases, they didn't have a voice. And I gave them a path and I gave them a voice. And we had some really incredible success. And I think it was because somebody believed in them and was willing to invest in them. And that was really powerful.
That's great. Yeah, that must have felt really great.
So feedback can be a tough process for high achieving leaders who are used to like getting it right a lot. And it can take some time to learn to look at context around feedback, like who's delivering it and know what filters to apply, all the things. So how has your relationship with feedback at work evolved over time? Like the way you think about it, how you react to it, how you process it, and maybe even how you invite it. Maybe take us on that journey from early in your career to now, how that's evolved.
I've always been an achiever, a bit of a perfectionist. And for whatever reason, I've always been really comfortable with feedback, and I've invited it. But I found for a lot of my career, I actually didn't get a lot of feedback. Or I would hear things like, it's great. Keep doing more of that. And I always found it frustrating, because I wanted to have that feedback maybe sometimes unhealthy because I was probably beating myself up for
Mhm.
trying to go too far and trying to want to do better. But it has really driven how I and inspired or influenced how I lead today.
Mm.
I give a lot of feedback to my teams, and it takes a little bit of time when people first start to work with me, because it can be if they're not used to it, so then it can be
Mhm.
challenging, and they have to understand that it comes from a place of wanting to inspire them to be able to be their best as well.
Mhm.
But you have to create a culture. If you want that, you have to create a culture where people can give you feedback back. And that's something that has been, I think, a key part of the ability to bring teams together, where you create that culture of openness, where it's not about being negative or bringing somebody's work down. It's about how do we continue to make those improvements that enable us all to be better.
Yeah.
Like we like to talk about, like, how do we get 1% better by really evaluating and being honest with where we're at. And so
Mhm.
I really didn't have very many people in my career that ever gave me a lot of great feedback.
Wow.
And until I would say I created that within my own teams, where people of every level have the ability to do that. And we learn from people that have different perspectives and views and places in their career. So I'm constantly learning from my team, and I think they are for me as well.
How do you signal to your team that it's okay to give you feedback? Because that is a tough one. The CEO. I mean, you maybe don't hear a lot of feedback because people are nervous. So how do you signal to them?
I think you have to get beyond the surface level answer. And some of that is also being open about where you saw your own performance. I was noticing when I did this, here's some of my observations of where I thought I could do better. What do you think? Do you think I did this well or that? And so you have to go beyond like the how did I do question,
Mhm.
and really get to the heart of what you're trying to achieve. And it takes time. I just had a junior woman on our team who was actually having to do a presentation for me. She was petrified to do this presentation because she was afraid of the feedback. And I had to work through her manager to be able to kind of coach her on how she could work with me and how I could work with her, so that she saw it for the context that it is. But it's about creating sort of that place where people can say what they think, and also teaching people how to do that in a way that's constructive.
Mhm. If I were somebody on your team and you knew I was really uncomfortable about getting feedback, how would you approach it with me? Like, what are your strategies for how to do that well?
I would say through this process, I'm going to let you know that I'm going to give you some feedback. And I want you to understand that my intention is to be able to think about how do we do it better. And I'm really open for you to be able to give me feedback back.
Mm.
And if there's feedback that I'm giving you and you don't necessarily understand it or you disagree with it, I want you to really have the opportunity to share that with me too. And the goal is that we're working together to make it the best possible.
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on what I would imagine that person's experience was of giving you feedback. Like, there's probably so many stories in that person's head about what you might say, or is this allowed, or oh my God, this I'm gonna get fired if I give the CEO feedback, right? And so this is all driven by our inner critics, and a lot of us high achieving leaders, in your shoes, have those moments, those voices, those critical kind of stories that may stop us from doing something or may keep us, stuck in a situation. So I'm curious for you, has there been in your career, maybe not now, but in your journey, kind of on your rise up to the CEO position, any kind of stories or limiting beliefs that you've had to really let go of, like they might be on repeat for you, in order to kind of make it to that next level, right? In order to either grow or make it into the next role.
Of course, and I think we all have those stories like every day. It's not like you check the box and they go away. I think it's a constant evolution. Hopefully, over time they get smaller. You learn how to deal with them in different ways. Um, but we all have those, whether they're our appearance, or whether it's what we know, or whatever that looks like. I would say for me, the biggest story that I had, and I think a lot of people as they're going through the ladder face sort of the same thing, is this belief that that I wasn't good enough, and that I needed to have this checkbox, this hit this certain milestone, or this credential, or achieve that next title in order to be able to do whatever the next thing was. And so then it sets you in this cycle where you're constantly achieving, but not really being satisfied with where you were at. And it's kind of too bad when I look back and think about some of the things I achieved. And I was like, okay, I got that one. Now it's on to the next one, and never really like relishing where you sit and what you did and how impactful that was. So letting go of that mindset, I think, is a really big and an ongoing journey to continue to make sure that you go, okay, that's that story, and being self-aware enough to be able to go check, like let that go, so that it's not there.
Right. We talk a lot about this idea of remembering that it's not you. You know, the story may or may not be true, and this voice is not necessarily you. It's a different, it's a critic that's a part of you, but it's not actually you. So I think it's really true. And what you said, that that note about women in particular, there's that study on job applications where I think women, Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's like we have to feel like we have 95 or some crazy percentage of the qualifications checked, whereas men will often go in with, 50% of the qualifications checked. And it's just like this sort of systemic belief system, I think, that a lot of women leaders do carry with them. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, my first CEO job, I didn't apply to be the CEO. I actually applied to be the chief revenue officer. And then I became the CEO. And with that comes this constant look of am I supposed to be here? And am I qualified to do this? And it's something that I think that you have to learn, that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know everything. And when you can lean into that and rely on your team who may know more, that becomes really powerful.
Would you mind telling us a story? Tell us about how that went from CRO application to CEO.
I was contacted by a recruiter to join an organization. And it was, at the time, I was considering leaving a different organization that I was in. And I agreed to have the conversation to be the chief revenue officer. And at the time, there was also a leadership change underway with the CEO, and I wasn't aware of it. And so through this process, I had the opportunity to meet the board. They were understanding what my skill set was. And there was a series of events that happened, but I ended up becoming the CEO. And I can tell you for sure, I never would have applied for that role, because I actually felt that I still had a milestone in my career that I hadn't yet achieved. Through much of my career, I've always been in sort of sales roles, marketing roles, product development roles, but I'd never in my career actually done a role where I was in a financial capacity until I was at Helm. And during sort of the latter part of my time there, I actually ended up taking over the investor relations. We were a public company. I was asked to take over that function. I was like, me? I've never run a financial organization. And they said, well, a big part of this is about your ability to tell a story. And we think that you have that capability. So I had this on my resume. I'd been running investor relations for a public company, but in my mind, I had this sort of scotoma that I couldn't, wasn't quite ready for that CEO role, because I needed some sort of financial checkbox that wasn't there. And I'd led large organizations, had managed big P&L, big budgets, all of those different things. But it's interesting how you let those beliefs hold you back. And it was really freeing to realize that somebody did invest in me. They put their faith in me, and I was able to step into that role. And I already had all of the skills that I needed to be able to be successful there. But I don't know if I would have stood up for it at that point in time. And I like looking back, it's a really good lesson of where we do hold ourselves back. And I'm really lucky that somebody, invested in me.
That's a great story. And, if we all wait for having the experience, we'll never take the first step into something new. Right. So
yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
So Ginger, you have done a lot at the top, and I can say from my own experience, and I'm sure others could relate to this, is that it can be sort of lonely up there. There are not a lot of people to talk to. You have to be careful with how you share information. Sometimes like you have to show up in certain ways. It's just the job requires sort of a different level that can sometimes be isolating. And, some of the ways that people will deal with that is they will look to a coach. Because it's a great place to be able to deconstruct issues, to go over challenges together, to understand, what might be holding you back or what you might want to do. But some people, I think, resist it. Like they don't think they need help, or maybe they've had a negative experience. We would love to know your thoughts about coaching, just as a tool for someone at your level. Particularly, like, have you had a coach? Did it land for you? Did it not land for you? And what do you think is the value of coaching for leaders like yourselves?
I've had several coaches, actually quite a few coaches throughout my career, and I've had them for different reasons at different points in time. I've had them when I've been looking for what that next role is and what are the things that you need to do, again, probably from the standpoint early on of like checking the box. But such a big part of that is your mindset. And so from my experience working with coaches, they really are about enabling you to push beyond the limitations and the stories that you set for yourself, and helping you identify where your blind spots are. I was always looking for a coach to beat me up. Like I felt like they needed to like be hard on me so that I could do more, because I, for whatever reason, I wasn't thinking I was doing enough, which is, kind of crazy to think about. One of the best coaches that I had in my career, when we did our intake sort of process, I said, I'm really looking for somebody who's going to hold me accountable, because my previous coaches have let me talk my way out of them holding me accountable. And his response, it was a male coach. He said, do you ever think that maybe you need a coach that gives you a hug? I was like, oh, this is definitely not going to work. But it was a really powerful, like sort of lesson that sometimes we need people to actually help us recognize that we're doing okay, and that it's not about somebody beating you up. It's helping you see where your gaps are in kind of that process. So I think that there's different types of coaches that you probably need at different phases of your career where you're at. And so really understanding what you're looking for is helpful. But I can't really imagine achieving the levels that I have without having had that sort of unbiased person, because you can tell them that you're like your friends. If you talk to your friends or coworkers, they see one part of you that you are allowing them to see. And if you have a really successful, healthy relationship with your coach, you can kind of get into the real things that are driving and kind of holding you back.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It sounds like your experience with coaches has been most powerful when it is about really, like, we talk about like the being, like how you show up in that work, right? You're not necessarily hiring a coach. Maybe earlier in your career, you were hiring a coach because you're like, help me check the boxes, help me like do the tasks, help me do the things. Now you're at a point where you're like, yeah, I got it. My big challenge is like, how do I show up in this in a way that drives the results I'm looking for?
When you achieve these levels, you know what to do, right? Like we inherently know that there's certain activities that are going to help you be successful. And it's more about helping you understand why you're not doing what you already know you need to do at times. And that can be really powerful, because we all have these gaps where we let our stories, our biases, other things, sort of block us from achieving our true potential. And having somebody hold you accountable to that and making sure that you're pushing towards what you really want to achieve, I think is really powerful.
Yeah. I love what you said too about, he kind of took the alternative approach and said, maybe you need someone to give you a hug. It's like this idea that sometimes, breaking the pattern, like if your pattern is just, I'm going to be tough on myself and I'm going to push myself and I'm going to do, go.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great coach who could say, well, hold on. It sounds like the other side of that is maybe we need a little softening or softness right over here for you. And that's actually the growth edge, right? Yeah. You don't need more, pounding and criticizing. Yes. We actually need some softness and some self-compassion to break through some of those things. So I think that's That's really cool that you were able to experience that, because I don't think everyone does. Even with great coaches, sometimes that gets missed.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever had in my career was from one of my bosses, who said to me, you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. And at the time, I was like, that's really offensive.
Why not?
And I was like, oh, I can't believe that they said that. But the point was that I needed to relax a little bit. I needed to have fun. I needed to focus less on being the absolute best and more about being like having those interpersonal skills. And that wasn't inherent because it came from this world where I felt like I always had to prove my worth. And I think that as women, that's oftentimes the case because we might be the only one who's ever been in that spot before. And so for me, I always felt like I had to validate I deserve to be here. And the advice was centered on the fact that we already all know you deserve to be here. Stop like trying to demonstrate that and just be present. And I think that was it's really powerful. And it honestly took me years to understand what the value of that statement was, but it's something that I go back to a lot. And I think it makes it much easier for me to be sort of calm and grounded, even when things are tense or, I'm scared of whatever situation is kind of going on, to remind like, I deserve to be here. You've got this, like, just enjoy kind of where you're at.
Yeah, that's great. This is a question that's not, we didn't give you a warning about, but it's just a great segue, which is, we in these big leadership positions, it's really common to kind of put on a different persona, right? That we think is required in the room. And it's like imagine if you had a closet of coats and in the morning you were like, well, I need this one for the board meeting today and I'm going to put this on. And it might be close to you, but it's not actually the ginger essence, right? It's like, it's sort of, that's what I was hearing when I was hearing that story from you, is like the feedback that you were getting was we hired you. We want your essence to be here just as it is, not trying to, convince us that more or whatever the persona was. But I wonder if that lands for you, this idea of kind of trying to kind of wear a different persona or wear a different coat in certain situations versus sort of just being you.
I think it's very true for the position that I'm sitting in today. Coming in, I'm almost on 2 years in my role leading Better Homes and Gardens. And I came on the heels of Sherry Chris, who in the real estate industry is iconic, and she's got her own Pantone color, and like there's 2 people in the world who have their own Pantone color, and everyone knows her face, and she's just this force of nature. And we have completely different styles on how we lead and how we interact, and I had to really think about how I wanted to show up in this new role, because if I went in and tried to be Sherry Chris, I would absolutely fail in doing so. Yeah. And so from the very first day that I stepped into this role, I said, I want to honor her legacy, but I'm planning to chart my own path, and I'm not planning to go in her footsteps. I'm planning to take my own way. And what I think I've really led through that very authentically. I've been myself, and I've led in a different way. And she has an amazing legacy that I believe that I'm really fostering and carrying on, but I'm doing it my way. And I believe that I've garnered a lot of support from our staff, from our affiliated brokers and agents, because they see a different path and they like it Ginger's way just as well as they liked it Sherry's way.
That's it. But they would have struggled to, they would have known, they would have felt it, the disingenuousness, had you tried to do it her way. Yes. Even if with the best intentions, the energy, like how it landed for them it wouldn't have felt right. It wouldn't have been successful.
It wouldn't have been authentic. I couldn't have possibly been her because I'm not her. And I wasn't placed in this role to be her. I was placed in the role to be me because of my own unique experiences and path and journeys and knowledge. And it's great to be at a place in my career where I recognize that. It's not an easy path to get to, but I know that that I'm in an amazing position because I've earned it and I have a lot of gifts to be here. And I have to lean into what those gifts are, which are my own gifts.
Absolutely. One of the things that when you walk into a situation like that, especially the one you described, there can be conflict, because that's like change. Whoa, who is
Yeah.
this ginger person coming in here and what is happening now? And so, a lot of people don't like conflict, Ginger.
Yeah.
And for women, there's also this like added bar at times of needing to be liked before they can be respected. There's this thing that happens.
Yeah.
And so that conflict avoidance can be even more acute sometimes for women. So as a CEO, you deal with conflict every day. How do you manage it? Like how is your relationship with it and your approach evolved over time around conflict too?
I definitely for a long time probably avoided conflict. I don't avoid conflict today, but I also don't like to create it for conflict's sake. And I think we're actually seeing a lot of this right now in our industry. It's like we want the flashy headline, we want the shock value, and I kind of like I don't really have the desire to participate in a lot of that because it's not productive towards like the end game that we're looking for. I think that you have to approach conflict as different perspectives, and it's really important that you understand different perspectives of where people are coming from and understanding the motivations and why they may have a different viewpoint, and then figure out how you come to agreement on something that has the best capacity to kind of solve the problem for everybody. Not everything can be a win-win, but when you come at challenges or conflicts or problems from a lens of trying to understand and solve, I think it really makes it much easier. I'm not afraid of having tough conversations, but you can't have those conversations if you don't have a good understanding of why people are at where they're at. And having the ability to take a stand has to always come from a place, I think, of understanding where other people are.
Yeah. This idea about, sometimes we talk about in our work about how sometimes the opposite of your story can also be true, and if we get too righteous about being right, this like below the line sort of righteousness behavior, then you completely miss sort of that opportunity for openness and curiosity that could actually maybe drive the path forward to help you sort of resolve that conflict. I really like the way that you described that empathy, that understanding. How do you do that exactly, Ginger? Like if we were having, let's say the two of us were colleagues and we were working together and we were on two sides of an issue, we both were like intractable about it. It felt like how would you engage with me on that?
I think I'd ask you questions to understand, do we have the same understanding of what we're trying to solve? Probably starts with it, because sometimes that's actually the root of conflict, is that you're trying to achieve different things. And so it comes from that. I like to think of conflict resolution as sort of alignment. As a leader, there's conflict all day long because people want to go a different direction. They don't want to do what you want to do. And getting alignment around where you're going it has to be sort of the first place that you go. And once you get that, then I think there can be a give and take of where you're at. Like my opinion can be changed. And I think that that's really important. Actually, in school, I studied constitutional law, and I loved that class. It was my favorite class. I blew the curve in it because I liked it so much. But one of the things that we had to do is we actually had to write from both sides. You had to write both arguments. And I think that skill actually carries through in a lot of things, because when you have to write both arguments, it makes it easier to kind of move forward. But it all starts with alignment. And so often it's the end goal that's the root cause. It's not the reasons, that you may think that they are.
I love that. Make sure that you are solving or talking about the same thing. Are we both focused on the same thing? That's so smart. And then the second thing is making sure that you could you tell the story from their perspective? Could you sit down and actually understand it from their perspective? Because maybe there's an unlock in there by just doing that.
I was just going to say that so often we get entrenched in the belief that we start with, and we're not willing to make the movements in order to be able to go somewhere else. And it's like one way or the other. And there really is never really it's not that black and white. There is
Mhm.
these shades of gray that get you to alignment that I think are really powerful, but you have to be willing to move. And sometimes it takes more time than others. Sometimes other people aren't willing to move. But if you do understand their motivations and you can listen and you can ask questions and you can repeat things back, I think that it creates that path for understanding that enables
Which
collaboration.
also requires you as the leader to probably let go of some ego. I think what gets in the way of not being able to see the other side is just this like, my ego is like, but I'm right. I have to be right. People have to see me as the person who is always right. Like there is this sort of identity and ego that's involved in that. And so you do have to decide to get curious. You have to decide that that's okay to let go, which is what it sounds like you're doing, which is great.
Yeah, I think like ego, we all have ego. Like I'd like to say like I don't have any ego. Well, like we all have ego. It's just part of who we are. But I think that you have to determine where that has the best place and where to use it. And when you're trying to come to an agreement or an alignment with whether it's a team member, whether it's a partner, whether it's a competitor, that ego is kind of the killer of a lot of like real potential. And you have to take the personal side of it out, which can be really hard when you're dealing with a business situation.
Yeah.
But it can't be personal, because if it gets too personal to you, that's where you end up with a losing situation, because it's about digging your heels in because you have to be right. And I think that that's really powerful when you can like set that aside.
Yeah. I'm going to shift gears for a minute. I mean, I think a lot of what we've heard you talking about is sort of modeling, right? You're doing so much modeling for your team of you just listening, feedback delivery, curiosity. Another thing we are curious about from your perspective is how are you modeling sort of your own energy management, right? We're very aware and have observed from leaders that we've worked with or know well that, it tends to be contagious, right? Kind of the way that you're managing your energy tends to be the way that then others are looking to you of like, oh, I guess that's how I need to be. Just curious about how, you're managing your own energy and how you're kind of infusing that culturally into your team. How does that show up for you?
Um, Energy is everything. I was actually laughing over the holidays. My son's in college, and he came home for the holiday break, and he was being like grouchy. And I looked at him like, "Come on, you're like bringing me down, dude. Like,
Yeah.
your energy is bringing me down." I don't think I realized for a long time how important our energy is and how much we feed our energy off of other people. So how I show up every day does impact everything. And I've gotten really good, actually. Sometimes my team will see me come on and be like, I'm having a really bad day. I'm just warning you. And by calling that out, it actually like sets the tone a little bit differently. People are like, oh, okay, good to know. Um, but it's as you can hear here, I'm coming back from a cold, and I think that it's a good example of when we let our energy go too far, we end up getting sick, or we end up getting tired, or we feel unmotivated. And it's really important to be able to have like your triggers that you understand when that's happening, because it's really hard to be a leader when your own energy is down. I find that I travel a lot for work. And if I've traveled too much and I see my routine is getting a little bit off balance, then it ends up reflecting in my interactions and my energy. So I actually do a lot of, I hate the word balance, because like the reality is when you're in positions like this, like balance doesn't really fully exist. But what you have to figure out is sort of this integration of techniques that enable you to be healthy. And for me, walking is a big one. I do a ton of walking. I live by the water, so I'm fortunate that I can do that and get out. And I also made the mistake maybe of getting a very active dog who requires me to get a lot of exercise. But it is my place where I can reset. And so I do a lot of walking, I do yoga, I do meditation, I read a lot. And those are my tools for giving myself the ability to reset. And if I don't do it, I can feel it. I feel myself getting sick. or I'm grouchy. And, finding that awareness of when your energy is down is really important, so that you can then take the moment to say, okay, have you done your yoga? Did you meditate? Go for a walk, step away from the computer, whatever that is that enables you to show up at your best.
Yeah. I love that. I think, this idea of one, identifying your trigger, knowing what your go-to kind of recharge move is. And then the other thing that you said was so great is just naming it for your team.
Yeah.
Like that is huge. What a cool unlock and model. Great leaders do that. We're curious about, there's just more appreciation needed for women leaders in this space. You're a fantastic one, and we have so much appreciation for you and everything you're sharing here. But really curious, when you think about who you think has been tremendously impactful, either to you personally or out in the space, who are two people, maybe one inside of real estate and one outside of real estate, two women who you just really admire for whatever reason?
Oh, do I have to only name two? I could probably
No, you can name more, of course. More is better here.
Well, I think I have to start with honoring some of the women that have paved the way for people like me. We already talked a little bit about Sherry Chris. She has been such an enormous source of inspiration for so many people. And there's a few people sort of in that same category with Sherry that I can think of: Pam O'Connor, Leslie Appleton Young, just Mary Jo Cowan, who's on the MLS side, that have been at the forefront of women leadership for a long time before there were others in their sort of peer class. And I'm so appreciative for the work that they've done and how open and supportive that they've been for myself and for other women leaders. Yeah. And then there's this, I would say, like for me personally, I have this whole class of women leaders that I admire and I lean on and who inspire me and also challenge me. Women like Vanessa Bergmark with Red Oak Realty, who is one of my personal friends. We just went to Africa this year together, and we meet regularly to sort of challenge each other. She's not in my network, but she's my personal friend and also my professional like peer, I guess I would say. Stephanie Anton, who's the president of Corcoran, is someone who I interact with, and we're able to really share our ideas and stories together. There's Anita Head, who I know that sort of introduced me to the Helm, and we haven't known each other very long, but she's somebody who I really lean on and rely on for her wisdom. She was the one of the founders and owners of Paragon Real Estate in San Francisco, and so many more that I could name. We're so lucky to have such a supportive group of women in this industry that help guide and support others. Outside real estate, there's Eleanor Roosevelt has always been really inspirational to me, and it, kind of hark back in time, but she always had this view of thinking about both leadership, but also taking a stand and supporting women's rights, social justice issues. And that's something that I think is really important. When we reach a place where we have a platform, I think we have an obligation to use it for some good. And that's something that's always been on the forefront of my mind, as how do I make sure that as I'm achieving, I'm also giving back in a way that's really meaningful to community, to our society, kind of all of those things.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into my last question, which is, you've made a tremendous impact, I'm sure, on so many people as you've been a leader across all these different companies. If you were to flash forward to your 100th birthday, what is the thing that you hope people will say about your impact on them or the space or the world?
I hope they say that I made the industry better, that I made communities better, and I hope that I've made their life better by giving them an opportunity to do something maybe they didn't think that they could do.
Good legacy.
It's great.
Good legacy. Yeah. All right. Last question for you today. You have been incredibly generous with all of your insights, Ginger. So thank you so much for spending time with us. As we end, we'd love for you to leave everyone listening with the wisdom you'd actually give yourself. So the question is, if you could look back now, what advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
I would say, don't take yourself so seriously and enjoy the journey, because leadership and our career path, it really is a marathon, and you have to preserve your energy. It's going to take hard work. It's going to take grit, but you have to enjoy that path. And so take a moment to appreciate each of the milestones that you achieve, because they all add up to something that's much greater than any individual experience. And every day is a gift. Like, we're so lucky to be here. We're so lucky to work in this industry, and take the time to enjoy that.
That's great. A follow-on question for you is, what would that have looked like? What would that have looked like for you at 25 to not take it so seriously?
It's a great question. I think I would have congratulated myself for what I'd achieved. Yeah, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, and I grew up in Arizona, went to school in Arizona, went to a state school, and I always knew I wanted to do something big, but I don't know if I knew what that journey would look like. When I was 23 years old, I packed my car and I moved to San Francisco with all of my possessions in my car. And I don't think I realized at the time how life-changing that would be, and also how much of a big deal that was to take that risk to move to a place where I didn't know people, and to invest and step into a new path, a new journey. And I think I would have given myself some grace for how I really was hard on myself through all those years. And I wish I would have congratulated myself sort of along the way, because it's pretty impressive when I look back at some of the things that I did, and I can't believe I had the courage to do, but it took a long time to realize that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's perfect. That's exactly right. With that, that's the end. So we just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for coming today. Even though you're recovering from your illness and you were squeezing us in back to back for the ginger tours. I mean, it's just, we feel very fortunate to have had even just 60 minutes with you. And I know I speak for Heather when I say we are so grateful for what you do in this industry. And we are absolutely cheering you on every step of the way. And thanks for being a friend of the Helm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ginger.